The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends, and welcome to our next episode of the HX Collective podcast, where today I cannot wait for this conversation. You are going to get to hear from one of the coolest people that I have in my orbit in a united spirit of elevating human flourishing. Today, you're going to meet my guest, Anne-Marie Nest. Anne-Marie is a trainer, a coach, and a consultant who helps people amplify their voices in a way that leads to great outcomes, great performance, and great profitability. And when we get into our conversation today, she's going to share with us her deep subject matter expertise in the concept of our voices. Now, when you think about voice, you think about it in the actual sound that we make, but she's also talking about voice in the space of our whole personhood and what that means to really elevate the human experience. She's going to bring us a perspective of how voice and engagement around leadership and culture, how this can make a huge difference in our lives professionally and relationally. So without further ado, I welcome my good friend Anne-Marie. And as we're going to share your bio and some tools in the show notes, can we start, friend, by tell us a little bit about who you are, give us a little bit more about your background and how this really leads to the kind of work you're doing in the space of your business. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It is an honor to be here with you today, Deb. I am a big fan of yours and of the mission of HX Collective. So my background is as a professional performer, and then I specialized in voice and speech, learning the mechanics of how to help amplify people's voices, create more resonance, free them up for the greatest expression. I was a professor in higher ed for several years within theater departments, but it's there in higher ed that I got pulled into other departments to help their top researchers and their provost deans articulate their messages in a way that reached a greater audience. So I love my researchers. They're the best. And they were not always given the tools to communicate their research to a lay audience. Yeah. So a lot of what I did was help them take their really great work and get it to a wider audience. And it was there that I thought, oh, I can have a greater reach with this work. I can do more for the world by stepping out beyond the bounds of higher ed and helping people all over, everywhere.
Well, and I love that history and that background, because so often when we think about how we do our professional work and how the things that we learn in one context, like theater, like higher ed, how translatable that is into areas of professional services. We both have a lot of experience in coaching lawyers and working with law firms. And so often it's not always obvious how these things intersect, but when you take something so deeply human like our voice, I'd love for you to share a bit more. When you say voice, there's the literal part of the voice, but I also think there's that figurative part where the voice around your message, how to translate things in a way that people can understand. And why do you see this as such a vital part of the human experience?
If you don't feel like you can speak out, or that when you do speak out and speak up, that you are not heard and understood, then you're not flourishing to the fullest. And this can be at all levels. So I worked with the chairman of a large law firm, global law firm, and he was someone who was very comfortable in a deals room. A couple people in the room, he could really work that room. all of a sudden he was thrust in a position which he wanted to be in, and which was really important to him to lead his firm in a way that was aligned with his values. He was being thrust into the limelight to speak to partners, do these global addresses. And he was so concerned that he would get it wrong. A lot of times people think about my work with marginalized groups. I work with women, I work with junior people. But here was this straight white man who was worried about offending people in his organization by saying the wrong thing because of his own blind spots. He was worried about messaging incorrectly that people would not understand him. And he came from a background that he was sort of first generation college, first generation in this sort of big space. And so it wasn't really imposter syndrome, but there was this sense of like, I could mess up at any point. And what that resulted in was him writing out 20 pages of notes
Wow.
for one partner address. And you can imagine a chairman of a law firm does not really have time to do that. And so we really looked under the hood and said, what's important to you? What do you value? Let's connect with that. And when he was able to connect with that and let go of the notes and trust that even if he got it wrong, people would understand his intention and he could go back and say it differently, then things just started to flow.
Yeah.
And he started to flourish as the chairman.
I love that. Well, first of all, category of one moment, right? I love that someone who has so skillful and obviously very accomplished in his own right to have the level of emotional intelligence and insight to not take what could be a simple partner address, not to take that for granted, to make that at a level of criticality and a level of planfulness and a level of awareness of blind spots. I mean, what a powerful context. And I love that what your work is doing, as you said, it's not only for people who have quiet voices and aren't being bold in their presence, or it's not only for those that may be in marginalized communities that need a bigger stake or seat at the table. I love that the work translates to human flourishing really at all levels of engagement. And so I want to encourage our listeners, wherever your starting point is right now today, to recognize that the insights that Anne-Marie is going to bring to us in the spirit of elevating our full presence, our full capacity to express who we are through our voice, that it's applicable wherever your starting point may be. Now, before we dig into a little bit deeper on the work, particularly around values and how that interconnects with voice, you've got a business. And I love the name, Resonate and Amplify. Do tell. How did you land at that positioning? And tell us about a little bit about the mission of what's coming next for you in your work.
Thank you. Yes. So as a voice teacher and a voice master, a lot of what I dealt with was resonance, literal resonance. Like, how do we create an echoing in our voice that makes it feel and sound warm and authoritative at the same time? How do we carry our voices? And that's often through resonance. As I've started working within organizations and law firms, that word has taken on a different meaning, or a more figurative meaning, is how do we create resonant cultures where we are amplifying one another? So resonance, for those of you that are not familiar, is when we have something like a guitar string, we can pluck the string and it will vibrate. However, if we don't have the body of the guitar, we won't hear it. Right. So the vibration of the string bounces up against something, which is the guitar. So in an organization, when you have a voice that's speaking out, it needs a chamber in order to be heard. It needs a proper container. And look, you can go all the way to Stradivarius, right? The best containers are the most resonant. And then when you have resonance, you're amplifying. You're amplifying all the voices and you're increasing your reach. So your impact is greater, because if you're resonating and amplifying at higher frequencies and at greater depth, then you're making more change in the world and you're affecting more people in the best ways.
Well, first of all, there is never going to be a minute on this podcast that I don't love a good metaphor that creates pictures in our brains. And so forever now, when we think of the plucking of a string, and the guitar or the container really is in that organizational level. It's such a terrific way of considering. So when we're looking at elevating our impact as leaders, or we're elevating our contribution in the places that we're planted, this idea of resonance, making our voice heard and cultivating the container in which it can be fully experienced. So let's talk about this now from the vantage point of what's the content. When we think about having a capacity to have courage or have confidence to sort of maybe neutralize some of that fear or imposter syndrome, I know a big piece of resonance and amplifying has everything to do with how that culture, how the voice can be used around speaking our values. Now, I know that many times when people think of speaking their values, they don't necessarily know how to communicate in a way where people can connect, or where, again, that resonance will live. So, can you speak a little bit more about recognizing that talking about values or communicating what matters to us, or in the case of your chairman example, like making sure that what he was saying was going to inspire the community of partners to have that resonance? How does voice in speaking your values really impact your own human experience, but the human flourishing for others?
Great. So, the first work to do in values is identifying what your values are as a human being. And a lot of times people get tripped up, like it sounds so big and crazy to think about what are my values? But it can be really simple. I value good friends. I value showing up for my daughters in a certain way. I value not burning out. I value having great relationships with my clients, right? It can be super simple. Once you define those values, then it's about how do I, well, for lack of a better word, operationalize. How do I bring that out in my daily life, right? How do I speak to those? And at the individual level, a lot of times I work with more junior people, first year, mid level associates. And it's about how can I find a way to articulate what's important to me? And this includes articulating boundaries, managing up, managing down, all of that in a way that I'm being heard. And a lot of times it's our habits that prevent us from being heard.
Mhm.
And those habits can be anything from minimizing. I'm going to make broad swath gendered statements, which is a lot of times women are taught to soften messages and sort of like, you're right. Yes, absolutely. Use a lot of fillers, right? And there's a time when sociolinguists would say that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Actually, that depending on who your audience is, that's a choice you can make, right? There, on the flip side of that, in the sort of toxic masculine culture, I'm not allowed to show vulnerability. I'm not allowed to not know. So I'm going to push my voice out. I'm going to sound really strident and authoritative, even when the substance isn't really there. So for those people that are at the mid-level or first year associate level, it's really like, okay, what's getting in your way? Can we give you a greater menu of options to articulate what you value, what your boundaries are, communicate to the people in a way that you can be heard, right? And that really amplifies or speaks to your values. Then leadership has to create a space where people can be heard and where you're encouraged to define those values. And then leadership has this really tough job of like not only articulating what the corporate or the firm's values are, but then really creating space for it and operationalizing it throughout the organization, which is a tall order, but it's a very noble one.
So, two kind of sub thoughts on this. So, the first piece is I'm imagining this scenario you've highlighted where equipping people in a manner where they can be authentic, that they can bring their whole self to an organization and contribute that in a way where it is visible, it's seen, and that they're really heard. I've often heard the statements that everything we do speaks. So whether it is the words that we're using on a verbal basis or what we're creating vocally or visually, those are all things that can help either increase the likelihood that we'll be heard or can be diminishing. I'm also, though, imagining that a big part of this is the resonance that comes with what you say and then how you actually show up. So if you create this condition, for
Mm.
instance, and have a core value around excellence or around, you know, taking, going the extra mile, and then your behavior doesn't actually show up in that manner. They're the disconnection. So can you say a little bit about how it's not only operationalizing is what sort of triggered this for me. It's like, it's not
Yeah.
just what we say. It's like, how does everything match that or create visibility so that our behaviors match? It's not just stake in the ground. This is what's important to me, but rather how does that manifest in how we show up full stop in all aspects of communicating? What would you say to
Yeah,
that?
so it sounds like what you're talking about is aligning
Yeah.
all of the behaviors.
Right. So it's not just
Yeah.
what we say, but it's, what would you give if a person's got a really strong sense of like boundaries and yet their behaviors don't necessarily match what they're saying, like where there's a disconnection. I think sometimes in communication, it can be scary to kind of put yourself into a space, but then not actually vote with your values in the way that you maybe hold a boundary. Or if you say, like, it's really important for me to have this, health and fitness, but then you're consistently not taking care of your body, or you're not paying attention to what you eat. There's always this disconnection, like, is that a core value or not a core value? And it can build a sense of misalignment or mistrust. Anything you might say to that as you look at everything speaks, our communication, it's all connected in that regard.
Yeah, I love that framing. Now I'm going to be thinking about this for a very long time, Deb. Everything does speak, and in fact, our words are only a small part of what people receive and hear. You know, I have a lot of compassion for saying I value this. So, like, I value working out, say, and then, but I don't go to the gym every morning.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a spot for real growth, is investigating why are those two misaligned? What's going on under the hood there? And when I work one-on-one with clients, that's a really great time to look at, okay, you've stated this is a value. Your actions are not aligning with that.
Yeah.
So what's there? And sometimes it's that you realize you don't really value that thing, or you don't value that thing the way you thought you did, right? And your actions not being able to keep up, you keep beating yourself up for not going to the gym, but in reality you don't really care about that. And instead what you really want to do is go dancing with your girlfriends on a Saturday night, and that's your physical activity,
Yeah.
right? I don't know if I'm answering your
No, you did
question
though.
in terms of, like,
Well,
if we're looking at law, are you thinking about law
no,
firms or?
I think it's just more on a human level, like, and actually, I
Yeah.
think what's really going on is I've been doing a lot of introspection personally,
Uh-huh.
coming upon a milestone birthday that I will be approaching my 6th decade of living, and it's a lot of the, like, I know that I hold myself out and holding certain things sacred, but then when I really evaluate where I spend my time, where I spend my
Mm.
talent, where I spend my treasures, my money, and sometimes those disconnections, when I think about using my voice, like, authenticity is gonna be what matters, and it's okay if I want to value something like working out, and I've told myself that means going to the gym, and what you're saying is like, well, if you have a high value of health and well-being, like, let's not get so locked on to beating ourselves up that we're not, being truthful with ourselves, like you said, dancing. So, you're answering it perfectly, and I think where I am recognizing this, and I think in my own self introspection, I'm coming upon the 6th decade of my life, and I am starting to recognize how important it is to be really clear and really harmonized and aligned with what really matters to me, and how that looks when I vote with my time, when I vote with my talent, when I vote with my money and my resources. Like, finding that connection is one of the greatest ways for me to use my voice in the spirit of my own flourishing, and for me to have capacities to be able to help others flourish. And so you're giving me a great example that instead of having a core value and then realizing, but I keep not showing up for myself in that way, maybe it's just because I don't value it, and that's okay. And I think, or maybe I'm going to express this value in a manner which is more consistent. By the way, I love the dancing piece as opposed to going to the gym. That would be high on my list. So I love that. I also love, though, the other piece of that you were describing And when you're talking about the leader's responsibility, I know one of the areas that sometimes when we think about how we're training or coaching people, a lot of times we're putting the pressure on the frontline person through their executive presence, or you need to show more confidence, or you need to use your body in this way. And yeah, I mean, those are certainly things that are important for an individual, but really a values driven organization, the tone of that is going to be fully established by what the leader's responsibility is. And, speaking our values and holding this space, they're the guitar container portion of an organization. Talk to me about why you think it's a leader's responsibility to show up and speak values first.
Well, the leader has the most power in the room. And if you can create a space where other people can show up and speak to their values, then you've won. And it's not an easy thing to do. And I think sometimes leaders get worried, like, oh, well, if they're going to show up with their whole self, like that's going to be a disaster and they're going to talk about all their feelings all the time. Well, no, because if people show up poorly when they feel like they can't really express themselves. So like sometimes people get really aggressive with their communication when they feel they haven't been heard for years, right? Or they feel like the message is going to be dismissed immediately. So if you create systemic check-ins for, okay, today on Fridays, we're going to have a time when everyone can show up to this meeting and have a conversation around this particular thing. I'm thinking about if you want to do shout outs for a team and you want to amplify others on your team, is there a Slack channel where every Friday your goal is to amplify someone else on your team and in your culture? So that creating that Slack channel, creating that routine is the leader's responsibility. And then everyone shows up in that particular way. I think one of my dear friends, Professor Lisa Nunn, her specialty is in creating cultures of belonging. And one thing that she and I talk a lot about is that, I'm brought in oftentimes to companies and firms to work with the junior people, like, oh, they're not showing up with executive presence. And, oh, they're being really reticent when speaking to clients, right? But the reality is they are reticent when speaking to clients because they haven't been fully prepped by leadership, by the senior partner. Like, this is what is going to happen in this meeting, and this is what you can contribute. So think about how you can show up fully, because being thrown into the lion's den and not given any preparation or any structure, it's like, oh, speak up. Why don't you speak up? Well, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And you don't really know if it's your place to speak up, especially if you're not the lead on a deal, you're not the lead with the client. You really have to be given clear instructions about when and how you can show up.
Yeah.
So
I think, that's such an important and such a practical tip. So again, two things that I'm taking away. First of all, I love the example of, how we can create capacities as leaders to build connection to and amplify a core value, and even the practicalities of a Slack channel and the ability to encourage people or even build ritual around this is what we do as an organization to ensure that we're catching people doing the right things. I mean, and that ability to show evidence of values. I love that. I think it's just a practical consideration. I'm suspecting, same thing could apply. I'm almost thinking like, families could absolutely build, the mother or father in a family could, again, create capacity to reinforce family values. And maybe it's not a Slack channel. At least I hope it's not, because I wouldn't know how to do that in my family. But I can say, over a meal, or at periodic times when your family's connecting to sort of revisit the core mission of your family or the values. Like I think there is so much, and I can't help but get enthusiastic when I think about what that would feel like to be in that space. So I think of my daughters, what that would feel like to give them an identity that they're attached to something bigger. And this is where it bleeds into your conversation with your professor around belonging, and that sense of I'm a part of something that's bigger than myself. I also think what a practical point of view, if you are a leader, like, don't assume. It doesn't really cost us anything if we want to see our next generation step up or speak up more freely. Have we equipped them? Have we been explicit in preparing them? Have we made it explicit that here is the point in time that I want you to say what you actually think? Sometimes that level of specificity only gives clarity to the individual that you're on. Now's the time. And what a great setup, as opposed to maybe sitting back and saying, oh, these young people, they're just so entitled. Like they don't, they're just too busy on TikTok all the time. You just start forming all of these assumptions when in reality, part of being a great leader and creating the container, we're going back to the guitar again, is like spell out what it looks like when we're supposed to speak up and how we're supposed to engage and what we're supposed to say. Like it doesn't take that much more as a leader to bring that set of conditions. Anything else you would add? I mean, am I hearing you right, or am I interpreting that?
You're exactly right. And I think it that requires a level of self-awareness as a leader too, which is well, some people value
Well, let's do
and some
podcast number
others
2 on that one, but continue.
So I think, not only do you create, as a leader, you create a space for it and you really clear container for it, but then when someone says something, you don't immediately dismiss or attack them or punish them for saying that thing. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Like, how can I hear that and yes and it, or redirect it in a way that helps move the mission forward?
Yeah.
It's challenging.
It is.
And my daughters, we have a ritual where I got these mindfulness cards when I visited my friend in Edinburgh. And so we have this box of mindfulness cards on the table at dinner time, and we always read a mindfulness card and do the activity. And sometimes I'll forget, and it's always my 7-year-old who says, "Mom, we have to do a mindfulness card." And that's when, as a leader, you go, "Oh, now my team is on board, and this is just part of the structure, and it can run by itself."
Yeah,
So
that's so powerful. Well, I would love to know, and I know our audience would benefit, when we think about taking what you know to be true about equipping people to use their voice in a way that resonates, either figuratively, like the actual instrument of the voice, or
literally, yeah, yep.
resonate as it relates to the container. What are some of the practical things that you do when you are helping an organization or an individual really find their voice, and particularly bringing values to life? What are some of the things that you do to equip your clients or individuals that you're coaching or working with in order to bring this to life?
Hmm. Is this where you want me to talk about the resetting the nervous system
Well, you can absolutely start there. I mean, I
or
think that's
other
gonna be one of
things?
our, our secret takeaways, but definitely talk about it, and, like, on a really
Well, no, but
practical level.
I can speak more broadly. So tools to
Like, or
give
what do you
people
do?
to
Like,
show up.
I mean, is it,
Yeah.
like, what do you train on? Or, what do
Okay.
you
Great.
yeah, what like, what's how do you facilitate people getting clear about what values are? Like, what are some of the, the practical things? Because 'Cause I'm trying to picture if I wanted
Yeah.
to have your assistance or help, like, what are
Uh,
some of the things that you do in order to awaken this sense of voice and speaking values into reality? What are some of those things?
well, typically when people come to me, it's because they've got something getting in their way. I'll speak to a client that I had who was going up for a CMO position at a large organization. And she's in her late 40s and equipped in all the ways to take over this position. And she was getting some feedback. The way that she communicated didn't seem like it had this sort of leadership presence or executive presence that would help other people follow her.
Mm,
Right. So when I first got on the call with her, I knew immediately what they were talking about. She grew up in Southern California, and there was a way of talking in the 1980s and 90s that was very much like this. And, it was a way of being in the world that fit with the culture. Now, here she is, this late 40s woman, and still having this voice. And so, not that I want to discount that voice entirely, but how do we then shift a little bit to say, okay, people are not hearing you in a way that you want to be heard? And what is it about the way you're showing up that links to your values, and what is it a way that it gets in the way of your values? And so one of the things that she talked about was, I really am a team player. I want everyone to feel comfortable. Her way of making people feel comfortable and of liking her was to have this sort of voice that she thought was going to get her what she wanted, and in the past certainly did, right? And she said, but now it's getting in my way, and people are saying I sound young or I don't sound like a leader. And it's like, okay, so your real value is to step into this leadership role to lead your organization in a particular way. So can we make this shift? So it's about getting under. So I attack it from both sides, or I greet it. I shouldn't say attack it from both sides. So one is like, literally, let's open up your voice, open up your breath, retrain some physical habits that are keeping you stuck here, and then looking underneath at the messages you're telling yourself that are causing you to show up in this way.
Mm.
And so I'm not sure if that answers your question,
Yeah.
but
No, it absolutely did.
that's one way that I work with people.
Yeah, well, but there's something really powerful. I bet there's a third piece too, because when you look at first there's a physicality of shifting gears that command more authority or make a person, lean in and listen. I mean, I think as you're describing, sounds like there are very practical things that you're doing at the physical level. I also love that you're helping a person get in touch with the mindsets that
Right.
are impacting an ability to be, have more command, more authority, more agency. And I suspect then there is also the content of what are you communicating and saying in a way that demonstrates complex thinking or problem solving or strategic know-how. So I'm gathering that it's likely on those multiple levels that you might equip an individual or a leader or an organization to create the outcomes that they're looking for. Anything else to add?
Right, and sometimes the habits that people have cause them the content to not be concise, or for their messages to be too strident or too soft. So you're right, exactly right, that it is about the words that we say and the strategic way that we approach our communication. And I will tell one other anecdote, that, I worked with a gentleman who was the general counsel for a large hedge fund. And it was well, in his words, a finance bro kind of culture, you know? And this was a man in his 60s who happened to also be gay. And some of the messages that he was getting from leadership about how he showed up had to do with his sounding gay. It was very coded language, but it was it was clear, right? And he was the one who said, I think this is what this is about. So two things happened. One, I said, listen, I can teach you how to code shift and sound more masculine. I can help you show up more butch, right? And he said, well, no, I'm too old to go back into the closet. I'm in a position of leadership now. I'm going to show up how I show up, and then I'm making room for the next generation, right? All of a sudden, he had identified a value that was near and dear to him, and all of a sudden, his communication was mission driven. And if a whole bunch of other things didn't fall into place, suddenly he showed up bolder, because he was like, no, I'm doing this for the next generation. I'm doing it for all those young people who feel they can't show up as themselves fully. And one of the big things that was getting in his way was concision. He was a rambler and he went around his points like crazy. I tried on the technical front to help him prepare and say, what are the 3 things you're going to say? Can you say that in one short sentence, right? All these very technical, practical tools. But I then could say, okay, what's the meat of the message? What's the mission here? What are you really trying to drive at? And because he was aligned in this different way, and I love alignment and harmonizing and all of that stuff, he was able to be more concise without even really trying.
Man, what a story, and what a moment of encouragement. I hope someone heard that story and that they see themselves in that story. I love that in a way that again continues to embolden. I guess I'm showing my core value of authenticity.
Mhm.
It really resonates, and what a powerful and very practical way that you can bring skill building. It's so much more than that, though. It's so much
Yeah.
more. Well, as I think about, the piece of resonance, and we've been talking a bit about that, I do, though, want you to say one or two things, if you will, about the power of amplifying. And, when I look at what it means for people to elevate human flourishing, there is an element of our own pieces of this, and then it's how we bring something for the benefit of lifting others. When you think about amplifying, can you give us, a practical sense of why that's so important as individuals or as leaders in creating our cultures that are values driven, that we've got that sense of resonance in our culture? Anything else to add about that piece of the equation?
Whenever you whenever you amplify someone else's message, and this can be in a very simple way, it can be around a table. I'll say colleague to colleague now. One of your colleagues says something, and you can tell and it's of value, right? And you can tell in the room that that did not land, right? And you can amplify in a very direct, practical way. I love the point Deb just made. I'd like to talk about that a little further, or I'd like to double down on that, right? That's a very practical way. As a leader, you can be conscious about. I think I really do believe that most people, and most leaders in particular, have excellent intentions.
Yeah.
And then you kind of forget to speak out someone's name and to elevate the thing that they did well. So when we can amplify others in the room that don't have the same power or position or privilege that we have, then we're going to have more innovative cultures. We're going to have more greater retention because people are like, I'm heard, I'm staying.
Yeah.
And we're going to do better business, which is what at the end of the day our shareholders want, our board wants, everyone wants. And so that very simple act of saying, I hear you, I see you, I'm going to make sure other people do, is extremely important. And then you talk about leadership pipelines. The minute that you amplify someone else's voice that maybe doesn't normally have a seat at the table, they're someone that's eventually going to go up in leadership and be in the position that you're in because you gave them that opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most generous things that, as a leader in my own experience, catching people in a moment, or making sure that if someone is being not heard or dismissed, to take the maturity that I have in my life experience and leadership experience and say, whoa, 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 we're not going to blow past that. Amory, say that
Yeah.
again, because that's the hingeman. And all of a sudden, I've just put a stake in the ground to say, like, oh, that was the smartest thing that anyone could say. And suddenly the whole room has to acknowledge, like, oh, the leader just spoke. The leader is putting her stamp of approval on this. And then to give another opportunity to communicate or clarify, to get the spotlight, that's powerful. And I want us to dig deeper. The next time we connect, that's what we're going to talk more about, because really, that's such a powerful and practical way that leaders can show up for their teams and to use their superpowers in a way that can really move the needle in the cultures and in the pipeline of creating future leaders. I love it. So,
Great.
Amory, when I connect with guests, and when we at the HX Collective, really look for ways to bring voices, your voice and the voice of others, into the mix, we always are wanting to keep our through line. We're united in our commitment to elevate human flourishing. And when you look ahead, 10 years from now, and we think about, like, the mission of our collective is doing its job, or we've created a set of experiences that a decade from now, that human flourishing and the human experience is actually one of the tenets, like we would see things like shareholder value. What is it that you hope to see in the future? And then what would give you confidence that it's even possible? But first, like, what do you want to see better or different if you look ahead 10 years?
Hmm. I want everyone to feel like they have a voice, like they are in. their ideas are valuable. They're what they have to say is going to be heard, and that they don't have to be afraid to speak out. That would and that especially, and I know I talked a lot about working with leaders, but especially voices that don't traditionally get heard in the workplaces or in our life, right? That they have a space and the encouragement and the freedom to speak out.
I love it. Is there anything you see present today that you have hope that that's even possible?
Well, right now I'm listening to Sarah McBride's book, and her experience of being transgender in politics, and the way in which she is boldly speaking out and recognizes the privilege and the platform she has to do that. But I think, wow, if we can have someone who is would typically feel like they didn't have a voice, speaking out and speaking up and creating space for other people, then there's hope. There's real hope that we're going to be in a better place, because what makes life better is a richness of voices in the room. And what creates more resonance is when we're bouncing off of one another our great ideas and our values and our beliefs and our hopes and fears. So that gives me a lot of hope. Another thing that gives me hope?
Tell me.
My 12-year-old daughter had 5 years ago, she had received a lot of feedback that she needs to self-advocate, that she needs to speak up for herself. And through my gentle encouragement and through her teacher's gentle encouragement, she is now a kid who receives feedback that she always knows how to advocate for herself, and she's never shy to ask for what she needs.
Wow.
And that gives me hope that my daughter can grow that much and can show up in a totally different way. It gives me a ton of hope.
I love that. Well, as we wrap our conversation today, usually I end with what I call the 3 by 30. 3 by 30 calls to action. What are 3 things that someone listening today could enact upon, or act upon, I should say, in the next 30 days? However, today we're getting a bonus feature. You've got a 5 by 30. And maybe at a real practical level, we're going to include a resource in the show notes, and it'll be available on the HX Collective website. But tell us a little bit about the 5 things that we can do to reset our nervous system as a very practical way to get in touch with our voice, to be able to take into account some of the examples that you've shared. What would you leave our listeners with today?
Sure. So a lot of times our best intentions are thwarted by a jacked up nervous system. So we want to be this kind of a leader. We want to communicate in this particular way. We want to remember to amplify others. And yet, because we're living in a constant state of stress, which most of us are in the contemporary culture that we are in, there are 5 easy ways to reset your nervous system instantaneously. And if you're able to down regulate, is what they call your nervous system, then all of this wonderful stuff starts to happen, and that you can show up with more calm, more confidence. Your prefrontal cortex, or your thinking brain, comes online, and you're able to get out of fight or flight. Those 5 things that I've outlined in that takeaway are grounding, literally grounding your feet and taking the energy from your head down to your feet, breathing low and slow, humming into the chest. So, humming is something that stimulates something called the vagus nerve, and the vagal nerve runs throughout your body. And when it's stimulated, all of a sudden our body says, oh, we can calm down.
Okay.
If you hum into your chest so that you feel this vibration in your chest, it's doing more than just that. It's warming up your voice so that you show up with a warm and inviting tone and more resonance, which then signals confidence and clarity and command and all of that good stuff. Havening is a way that you can instantly calm your nervous system by physically just taking your hands, like, so I have my arms crossed for those of you just listening, and I'm moving from my shoulders, my palms from my shoulders down to my elbows. And I'm doing this several times. Just that act actually stimulates our calming system. So number 5 is a head tilt and moving your eyes up to the opposite corner. So you face your face front, you tilt your ear to the same shoulder. So your right ear to your right shoulder, let's say, and then you move your eyes up to the corner, the far corner of the left far left corner. And you stay here and you breathe. And at some point, your eyes are going to start to water and your mouth is going to salivate.
Okay.
Right. And then you know you're done. And that is a signal that you've stimulated your rest and digest or your calming nervous system.
I love it. Anne-Marie, you are a gem. I am so grateful to be your friend, and I'm so glad that our listeners had a chance to hear from you today on this episode of the HX Collective podcast. I can't wait for us to connect again, and I want to encourage folks, voice is not just the physicality of our voice, it's our capacity to use it to create resonance. And as we think about leaders to speak our values, to create the container for resonance, and to use our superpower of amplifying, I can't wait for our next conversation to dig even deeper. I hope you have an enjoyable everything's what's next. And friends, we'll be back with Anne-Marie soon. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.